Herzlich willkommen zur Versammlung, Assembly, wie wir es nennen,
to the Assembly of the Female Peace Palace.
Willkommen in den
Welcome to the Münchner Kammerspiele.
Ich freue mich sehr, dass
I'm very happy
fast alle Gäste
to welcome so many guests, and many of whom traveled here from afar, and I'm so glad that they managed, even though there's a strike going on. People coming from Berlin, Ukraine, Turkey, France, Syria and Kurdistan. I would like to welcome Katrin Habenschaden, the second mayor of the city of Munich.
Kein Kommentar. Und Frau
And I welcome Katarzyna Wielgas-Skolimowska, who is the artistic director of the German Federal Cultural Foundation. And I welcome everybody who joins us via live stream. In 1915, a small group of women had a vision. They wanted to do something. They felt they had to do something against the violence of the First World War, hatred and nationalism. Within a very few weeks, individuals, including Anita Augsburg and Lida Gustava Heimann from Munich, organized an enormously well-prepared conference with roughly 1,500 women from 16 warring and neutral countries. They risked being indicted and convicted of treason. They risked their lives traveling through a Europe cut apart by bombs and trenches. And yet, they managed to meet over 4 days and adopted 20 resolutions that are still highly relevant today. These women have inspired us to organize the festival Female Peace Palace and today's assembly, to which we have invited a few brave people of today to share their survival strategies and their imagination with us in times of war. Brave people who use their art and/or their activism to resist the hopelessness that comes with any attack against the civil society, any eruption of violence. Art and theatre, we're convinced of this, can facilitate a poetic expression of pain, fear and contradictions, and can at the same time give us the power to resist and the humor we need to prevail, as Natalia Voroshbit manages with her text Green Corridors, which you will be able to see after this panel in Jan Christoph Gockel's production. We already see the stage of this play behind us. Teja Pajic, who is a director and survived the Bosnian War as a child, says that theatre is the only space where your encounter is so intimate that you simply cannot look away. Licht, light, is a piece in which she works with Yazidi women. She stages this at the Münchner Kammerspiele and the Kai Theatre in Brussels, and it's also part of the Female Peace Palace. We are here standing in front of the stage of Green Corridors, a massive wall with a broken clock that you cannot look away from. In the play, the wall stands for the corridors of transits, the waiting seemingly without end, until the clock falls from the wall and opens the space, as it were. For our assembly today and tomorrow, this wall may serve as an invitation to us, perhaps, to bring together, to come together with all our different perspectives that we embody with our fears and contradictions, to come together and to look until the field of vision widens. It was striking to me how much the issues that the women in The Hague discussed at their conference, how relevant they still are today, more than 100 years later. Even the first resolution that was adopted defines rape as an act of war. The pacifists back then defined the interdependencies of violence in societies and in armed conflicts, and innumerable activists have pointed out these connections time and again ever since. For example, in UN Resolution 1325, Women, Peace and Security of 2010, which is the basis of the concept of a feminist foreign policy. I'm very happy that two of these tireless activists will be here on the panel today. Kristina Lunz, who is a co-founder of the Center for Feminist Foreign Policy in Berlin. Welcome. And Françoise Vergès, who is a political scientist and activist. Welcome. Two more activists, Heidi Meinzold and Marike Fröhlich, will tell us now how things went on after 1915 and how after the conference in The Hague, the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom was founded. I would like to thank the German Federal Cultural Foundation for sponsoring this project, Anke Büttner and the team of Monacensia and my team here at the Kammerspiele for the preparations, for all the work that they did, and I now hand over to Katrin Habenschaden. Thank you very much.
Niemand ist vor Krieg beschützt.
No one is safe from war, and that is our sad reality. These are the words of the Belarus writer Volya Hapeyeva, and I'll use those to welcome you, ladies and gentlemen, even though these are drastic words to describe our condition. This is an assembly. That's how the two organizers of Münchner Kammerspiele and Monacensia call this two-day symposium, this really strong female peace palace festival. No one is safe from war. This quotation is from the literary essay A Whiff of Atrocity by Volya Hapeyeva for Female Peace Palace. We are here in the safe city of Munich, and we believe and hope that war and violence won't become our reality, and that war and violence will not overtake us with the same kind of cruelty, such as this was the case for the people in Ukraine, Syria, Iran, Afghanistan, and many countries of Africa as well as throughout the world. Nevertheless, even here in the secure city of Munich, we have to face the fact that many people in our city live together with us who are directly concerned by the effects of war. We have to admit that there are many interests that lead to a situation that war exists, and that this has to do with our legal opinions, with our actions in economy. And here we have Kristina Lunz and Françoise Vergès, who will discuss this evening about the reasons that have led to this situation. And as a politician of the Greens, I have to say I am very interested in that, and I wish I could stay in order to listen to that discussion. As mayor of a big city, which is doing everything that is possible, thank God, in order to help refugees and people in migration, to receive them, to accommodate them, or at least alleviate the most severe suffering. It's not only with the war of Ukraine that we all have seen new human abysses that have opened. The terrible consequences of war and atrocities, the abuse of power, those are all factors that we are confronted with, especially abuse of power against women. And these are consequences that have developed in zones of conflict, but which also are continued here in the city of Munich. This has to do with sexual violence as well as human trafficking. Of course, we have to protect ourselves in Germany, in Munich, against war with everything that is possible. And I certainly think that the general strategies of negotiation are sometimes they might seem exhausted, but that only has to do with the fact that we still think in the system of patriarchal hierarchies. Volya Hapeyeva therefore avoids to introduce herself as an expat or refugee. She instead prefers the term of a nomad for linguistic reasons, as she says, quotation, because terms like expats or immigrants are coined from the perspective of states. I don't want to think of myself in these categories, and I think that is something that we can understand really well. Part of pacifism is, and that is something that Volya Harpeyeva also emphasizes in her text, A Whiff of Atrocity, that we have to think about humanity and have a dialogue. She emphasizes how important the role of authors and artists is in order to reflect by the means we have, that is art and discussion. And we have to deconstruct terms such as heroism, soldiers' virtues, or chivalry. The festival Female Peace Palace is resolved to look at these ideas. We want to come into a discussion and think together, look at these terms that are difficult to actually understand. I, as a politician, mayor, and also patron of the research project Female Heritage, I am grateful to the artistic directors of the festival, Viola Hasselberg, Olivia Ebert, Anke Büttner, and Rebecca Faber, and also to all the guests from the many countries who have joined us. I hope that connections will be formed that will help us to think for peace together sustainably. And for me personally, I also hope that connections will be formed for me personally that will foster this thinking. I'd also like to thank the following speakers. I am particularly happy that Heidi Meinzold and Marike Fröhlich are here. They represent the German section of Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, and that actually got started in 1915 on the basis of the Congress in The Hague. I am also particularly happy to welcome the new director of the Federal Foundation for Culture, Katarina Wielga-Skolimowska. And you are most welcome. The Federal Foundation for Culture has generously promoted the Female Peace Palace and is a very important supporter also of many other cultural projects. The fact that you are here today shows that our partnership is on a solid basis. The Münchner Kammerspiele have made it their task here to promote theater and not to let a reality lie. The Monacensia in the Hildebrandhaus has made it its task to build a bridge from the past into the present, maybe beyond that. And it is important to have a positive cooperation. Here we are talking about the definition of female cultural legacy and to bring this into our collective memory and make our contribution also here in Munich. Cooperation projects such as this one make it possible that our memory culture is becoming more differentiated, that our city is becoming more diverse, that peace and equality, of course, constantly need role models and reflection in reality. We need a forum like this festival, and we need all these different types of fora in order to be able to clarify together what pacifism, which is what we want, of course, what pacifism can do and mean to us today. Thank you very much. Good evening. Before I'll ask Heidi Meinzold and Marike Fröhlich here on stage, I'd also like to thank you. I'm Olivia Ebert. I'm a dramaturg at the Kammerspiele here in Munich, and I'm so happy that we have this festival here today. And I'd like to thank not only everybody who's been preparing this, but also the people who've done research work, who have contributed in websites, podcasts, podcasts, archives on the Congress of 1915, who have seen to it that all the materials were found and collected. And Jessica Krause also contributed on the basis of her research, because she then all of a sudden came up with this picture from the Congress of 1915, which was sort of the kickstart of this idea. And then we also had the work of the historian Marita Kraus, who did research on the gynecologist Hope Bridges Adams Lehmann. And of course, Heidi Meinzold and Mareike Fröhlich also stand for the continuous work in this direction. And I'm so happy that you will give us your comments. Heidi Meinzold, the floor is yours.
Right. This is beautiful. It's wonderful to see such a big room and so many coming together here for a female peace palace. This is what we have always dreamed of at the International League, Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. When I first saw this presentation, I thought, wow. I mean, these are the stories, these are the images that have been with us at the League for 100 years and more. And we tried to carry this idea forward here in Munich as well. Personally, when I went to the premiere of Anti-War Woman, I thought, this is so wonderful. Coming from this fog, which is a great symbol, these women emerge from the fog, from the mist, and become present. Women who were so far ahead of their times and who carried on the message. So this emerging from the fog is a powerful image. So I am immensely grateful to all those who made this possible. Also the combination of Monacensia and the Kammerspiele. Because it's simply wonderful. The colors are beautiful and symbolic. Katrin Habenschaden said it already. We are faced with these dilemmas again that women were facing back in 1915. When they tried to organize this conference and tried to resist being labeled as unpatriotic, because they said this war has to end. And this is their legacy, which will remain with us. The women back then, I think, developed such logical arguments against war and against violence. They weren't just against war. From a feminist perspective, they criticized the entire complex of violence, which you always have to see in this sort of triangle that Anita Augsburg and others, other generations of feminists saw. The triangulation between patriarchy, militarism, and capitalism. And these points are still so relevant. Why are so few people convinced by this, or convinced that this is true? Why do we keep falling back into the old habits or stepping into the trap? If you look at the polls or any kind of survey, people want to live in peace. I don't know anybody who doesn't want to live in peace. And these people are not being naive. It's just that peace gives us the freedom to live in dignity and to live our own lives. And Marike will also speak about this in a minute, how relevant these issues are still are today. But let me just come back to 1915 and show you this T-shirt that I'm wearing. We made this in 2015 on the occasion of the 100th anniversary of WILP, because we stand on their shoulders, on the shoulders of these giantesses. These are just a few of them represented here on this T-shirt. It's symbolic, but of course it shows that we stand on their shoulders. By the way, one of the resolutions in The Hague was a call for another meeting or another conference after the war. They didn't manage to really convince the world leaders at the time to stop the war. I mean, there were a lot of them who said, your analysis is correct, but we're not going to stop the war. So in 1919, the women met again. They couldn't meet in Versailles. We heard this yesterday during the lecture, because the German women, or the participation of the German women, was important, and German women couldn't travel to France at the time. So they met in Zurich, in Switzerland, and discussed how women can make a contribution towards creating peace, shaping peace. One of the demands was for universal disarmament, which was precisely not what happened in Versailles. During those debates, women remained excluded. So in Versailles, the entire burden of guilt was placed on Germany, which then, of course, triggered yet another series of events that I'm not going to go into detail on. So this universal disarmament did not happen. The French women, by the way, only obtained the right to vote after the Second World War, which made them quite angry. Other women already had the vote. Women in Germany, for example, they had it in 1919, and they wanted to contribute to shaping policies. Anita Augsburg wanted to work, and Lida Gustave-Heimann, for example, wanted to work with Eisner. They also wanted to work for equal rights for children that were born out of marriage. They also were for decriminalization of abortion. All of this didn't happen. Then there was the revolution in Bavaria, which also didn't happen or was struck down. And then in 1923, and this is also worth noting, Constanze Hallgarten and Anita Augsburg demanded the expulsion of Hitler from Bavaria, because they knew Hitler means war. This didn't happen either. In 1933, the Nazis came to power. We also heard this yesterday during the lecture. And the archives, the papers, everything that Anita Augsburg and Lida Gustave-Heimann owned was destroyed, probably. And there were a lot of women who were blacklisted. A lot of women were deported to concentration camps or went into exile. Then in 1950, we finally thought that people had learned something from the war. And then Constanze Hallgarten and the other League women came back from exile from the United States and opposed rearmament, which in Germany happened pretty soon after the Second World War. Eleonore Romberg from Munich joined the group in 1956, not coming from a feminist background, but she came from social work, from the field of social work. At the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, we've always managed to bring together people coming from social work or from political work, working together for peace. Yeah, and that's how we continue. We're currently writing a book on Eleonore Romberg. It'll be presented on the 19th of June at the Foundation College, where she also taught, and we'll just keep going. And how we keep going, Mariko is going to tell you right now.
Ja, vielen Dank, Heidi.
Thank you very much, Heidi. Heidi is our expert on the history of the League, the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. It's a long name for an organization, so to keep it easy, I'll call ourselves either, or refer to ourselves either as Liga or League or WILPF. It's a great pleasure for me to be here today and to be here giving a speech among all those eminent panelists and other speakers. Thank you very much to the Monacensia and the Kammerspiele. We from the League are delighted to see our history here, or an artistic interpretation of it. And we also think it's great that you carry the issues forward and the debates forward, and that you highlight how relevant the discussions back then still are today. And it's also important to have space for discussion. The Female Peace Palace Symposium this weekend opens these spaces for an exchange, for coming together, and also to have controversial discussions. Because feminist peace work also means finding common ground. It means solidarity, and it also means a diversity of perspectives. Our organization is the world's oldest women's peace organization. We've existed for 108 years, and as Heidi Meinsold just said, today we are following the footsteps of the women who met back then, trying to find common ground to work for peace, and making great sacrifices to do so. Even today, we at WILPF International work together with our allies, trying to promote a feminist peace. In many places of the world, women have to make great sacrifices to work with us. I know of our colleagues from WILPF Afghanistan who are in exile, who are persecuted. We have a new section in Yemen in a very difficult situation. We have allies in Ukraine and in many other places of the world. If we look at the resolutions of 1915, and you can also see it tomorrow evening when the play Anti-War Women is staged here. Now, if you look at the resolutions, you could think that not a lot has changed in the world, because these demands sound shockingly relevant even today. Disarmament, following a logic of peace, not war, true political equal rights for all human beings, including women. But of course the world has changed. Political challenges have changed as well. Our realities have changed. I mean, we have a live stream today. And our organization has changed as well. In 1915, about 1,000 women came together from 16 countries. Today we have 40 member countries on all continents. We are still a membership-based organization, a grassroots organization. We try to work with hierarchies that are as flat as possible. We work at the local, regional, national and international level. We have a worldwide network. Shortly after our foundation in 1915, we had sections in Nepal, India, Mexico and Japan. Today, most of our sections are on the African continent.
Wir sind auch bei den Vereinten Nationen vertreten.
We also have a representation with the United Nations in Geneva and New York. And thanks to our decentralized structure, we managed to carry our messages, or the messages of our members, from the local level to the international level, including the Münchner Kammerspiele.
Seit der Gründung richten wir uns gegen alle Formen von
Since our founding, we've resisted all forms of war and violence. Heidi mentioned this as well. This includes resisting structural violence, sexism, racism, any kind of discrimination, because we want a feminist peace. A feminist peace is, by definition, an inclusive peace, a peace without structural violence. We're also a highly diverse organization. Diversity of positionalities, sometimes even political perspectives, age, of course, location. We have a lot of internal discussions among our members, and there will also be a discussion later on today, and I look forward to this. Now, having a long history also means working across generations. But one thing we have in common, we are striving for a feminist peace and for freedom. The topics we're working on today haven't really changed that much, but still they are as relevant as they ever were. Criticizing war, gender discrimination, violence, and also the knowledge that all of these aspects of structural violence are interlinked and can only be resisted and fought together. This is what drives us forward. Even in 1915, it was clear that it couldn't just be about reforming existing political institutions. It was about a transformation of political structures and political systems, away from the male-dominated, white-dominated, Eurocentric power. And we know that simply adding women to the mix or increasing female participation doesn't really change that much. That is why we want a feminist transformation of politics and of society. The continuity of topics and issues also is perpetuated when we look at exclusion of feminist peace activists, for example. Happens around the world, of course, in different ways, but it does happen everywhere. Women or people who advocate a feminist peace or feminist policy are denounced as naive, as utopians. And today in Germany we have a feminist foreign policy. It's been declared. So, does this mean that what the women have been doing for the past 100 years has borne fruit? Yes, of course, it's a huge success. Even 2 or 3 years ago, who would have thought that we would have a feminist foreign policy, that feminism would be in the center of political discourse? But does this mean that we can lean back, that our work is done? Absolutely not, because a lot of the issues are still relevant today. Issues that women have fought for back then, that we are fighting for now. Political persecution of our members, of those who fight with us, excluding people who suffer from intersectional and multiple discrimination, gender-based violence. Now, What is being remembered and who is being remembered? This is an interesting and highly relevant question. Today's discussion on feminist foreign policy seems to present a feminist foreign policy as this new idea. Well, it's a great idea, but it's not that new. There is a continuity of ideas, and it's important to highlight this. Sometimes we don't do this enough. Now, being made invisible is nothing new for feminists or feminist activists. The history of a feminist foreign policy goes back a long time, and these ideas go back even further than 1915. They didn't fall from the sky even in 1915. For example, there were women on the African continent who resisted colonialism. They too laid the foundation for what we call feminist foreign policy today. Now, what do we remember and what do we forget? It's a political question. Heidi Meinzoll mentioned it already. We stand on the shoulders of giants. And it's quite clear that we have to carry on this feminist peace, or these demands for a feminist peace. There's Resolution 1325, for example, which is a basis. But on this basis, we need to carry on. And in order to do this, we need spaces like this, today and tomorrow, opened by the Kammerspiele and Monacensia. Rooms or spaces that give room for complexity, for difficult discussion, and that invite us to listen to each other. Also, spaces to empower each other, because despite of all that we have achieved, we see that women's rights are being rolled back internationally. There's war, there's patriarchy, erupting and re-erupting worldwide. We need space for our feminist contents, and we need to continue debating so that they continue to be filled with meaning. Feminism is always transformative. It's not merely about reforms. It's about changing your perspectives, thinking around new lines, and taking into account especially the perspectives of those who are being excluded, who are being marginalized. And that is why I am so happy to see how interdisciplinary and how transnationally this event has been organized. I look forward very much to our exchange today and tomorrow with people from Ukraine, Syria, Belarus, and of course also Germany and other countries. Thank you very much to the Kammerspiele, to Monacensia, and I look forward to the discussion.
Noch eine letzte kleine Intervention.
One last brief intervention from my side, because we had actually also invited Goline Atay to take part in the following panel. She is the representative of the ZDF studios in Cairo. She actually had to cancel at short notice because she has to report about the current situation in Sudan. Nevertheless, she sent us a video message because we asked her about her views of the situation in Sudan against the background of our discussions here today. So here comes the video for you. Where there is war, the world is full of attention, but before and after there is nothing at all, hardly anything. That is one thing that I am seeing time and again in my job. Currently, there are fights going on in Sudan, and there are civilians in the middle of a nightmare. They are in the line of fire between militias that are fighting for power. And what can we do as Western states, as the international community of states, as as the United Nations. And in that case, I usually answer, well, quite a few things could have been done differently. From the beginning on, we could have gone for the right direction. For example, in the past months, when we were a part of the negotiations for peace in Sudan, because this was about the transition of power towards a civilian government. Now, of course, it is just true. No peace without justice. Instead of talking to militias that are responsible for atrocities and they are not being put to justice, they are being accepted as authorities in such negotiations, which means instead of sanctioning them, they are being rewarded. And democratic activists or the civil society who warned against such negotiations from the beginning on, and now today we know why, they actually didn't really play any role in the political process because, quotation, quite a few people thought they were not pragmatic enough. Now, that is only one of many observations that I have made, just as food for thought for today's discussions for you at the festival. Thank you very much.
Yeah,
Golinay Atai said that the working title of her video was that how supposedly promising negotiations finally led to war. That's the working title of her video message. Now, I'm really happy that we can now get started with the panel. I'm happy to have excellent guests, Kristina Lunz and Françoise Vergès, and please, I'd like to invite you to come up here on stage. The floor is yours.
Ja, auch von mir herzlich willkommen.
Right. Thank you very much and welcome from my part as well. I look forward to this discussion. I would now like to introduce our experts, the two women who are with us before we are going to listen to them. So thank you very much, Françoise Vergès. Françoise comes from France and La Réunion, who does colonial, anti-racist feminism. She's also an independent curator living in Paris. She is host of a L'Atelier, which is a workshop with artists and activists of color. And she published Un programme de désordre absolu, Décoloniser le musée, a feminist theory of violence, decolonial feminism, and décolonial dans l'espace public. Welcome. And I'm also happy to introduce Kristina Lunz, who is co-founder and co-director of the Center for Feminist Foreign Policy. She got a bachelor's degree in psychology and a first master's degree, a master's of science in global governance and ethics in London, then got a second master's degree in diplomacy as a fellow at the University of Oxford. She worked for the United Nations in Myanmar and an NGO in Colombia, and also initiated or co-initiated a number of campaigns, held fellowships for renowned institutions. She's a member of the advisory group of the Goalkeepers initiative of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation in 2019. Forbes counted her among the 30 under 30 in Europe and Germany, Austria, Switzerland. The Future of Foreign Politics is Feminist is a book that she wrote, and we're also going to discuss about this evening. Welcome, Kristina Lunz. About myself, my name's Tessa Hart. I am a cultural performer. I perform in films, theater, socio-cultural field, and I work in, many areas in the cultural field, organization as well, and I'm very happy that I was invited to be the moderator today.
Und vielleicht so ein bisschen einsteigend und überleitend von allem, was wir jetzt schon aufgenommen
Let's start by making a transition from what we heard during the previous session. Now, for you, if you look at the resolutions of the conference of 1915, what would be examples of current effects that these resolutions still have today?
Meinst du, also mir kommt direkt in dem Sinn, das, was nicht geklappt hat?
Well, first of all, what comes to my mind is what hasn't worked, because this is so striking. Over the decades, almost all resolutions or demands became a reality. Court of Arbitration, for example, United Nations, economic arbitration, women's suffrage, etc., etc. But the main demand was demilitarization. That was the demand that did not come true, that was not heeded, because there are powerful forces that resist. So this demand, reducing the potential for violence in our societies, is still relevant today. There is not enough money for hospital beds, for a fair distribution of vaccines worldwide, but there is a lot of money available for militarization. This year we exceeded the $2 billion level.
Der Ausgaben für Aufrüstung und Militarisierung. Also die
the expenditures for social matters or social funding is a fraction of that. So we actually financially fund a world that is becoming ever more destructive. And the trend is on the increase, which shows the tragic of this. This is the one demand that has not been fulfilled. Thank you for this analysis. Françoise, what would you say?
Well, good evening. Well, what happened in 1915 is, okay, it's a moment, but I will want to expand it before and after. And say that for a great part of humanity, war has been a permanent state. There have never been peace. So the importance of thinking what is peace, I think, is very central. I mean, 2 years ago, I was thinking, okay, how do I understand what's going on? And this notion of the state of permanent war helped me to think what was happening and how war was not just the bomb and the tank, but also all the economic war, cultural war, the war against migrants, the war against refugees, the war against women, against environmental activists everywhere, and also, as you say, the weapon industry, which is still very flourishing. I mean, France and Germany are among the the most important arms dealer. And so I was also thinking that we have to put again, the light on this industry, because if you fabricate weapons, it's not for peace. And it's becoming more and more sophisticated, and it's being used not just for war, but for surveillance against any form of dissent. I mean, we see it in France right now. And so there is really a criminalization that goes with the militarization. Criminalization of any form of dissent and censorship. And I was reading a text by Rosa Luxemburg, which she wrote in 1911. And I thought she talked about something that I thought also helped me to rethink all this moment. I mean, the text is very interesting, but it was a notion that I thought was very interesting, was armed peace, a peace that is armed. And I thought, because in fact there's no peace, it's just ceasefire, what is called peace. It's just a short interlude between two wars. Not necessarily in the same place, but the war is still going on constantly, somewhere. And right now, there are many, many wars in the world, not just in Ukraine. So that when I was starting to think this, to start to say, okay, there is no peace, in fact. It's just ceasefire. It's just an interlude. Then how do I rethink peace? Out, what is peace? Then out, perhaps, of the 1915 notion that was there. Because perhaps the women who did what they were doing, and which was great, perhaps had not integrated all the history before that had happened, especially colonial history and slavery and colonial slavery, which brought war on the African continent and increasing, in a way that has not been seen before. It's not that they were not war in Africa, but the slave trade really brought war and brought weapons and then colonization. So the question of war, waging war against humanity, has a long history. So I will start with that, and I will start also to what is peace, to give a new content to the question of peace, to pay attention when peace is just ceasefire. And so I will say that, but otherwise, effectively, this was a very important moment, but has to be taken as well as I say also, what were the other efforts in the world for peace? And they were very important, and they were perhaps not called this way. They were not called, movement for peace, but they were movement against war.
Ja, vielen Dank für diesen auch noch mal wichtigen weiteren
Thank you so much for this further perspective in this analysis.
Mich auch zu der Frage,
this also takes me to this question, because we have this expectation, also that was there in 1915. It was a self-organized conference. It was women as people without a political mandate, but it was women from a concrete context, privileged, mainly white women. Now, coming from today's perspective, and if we were to think about what format could be conceivable here in order to achieve freedom and peace, and to think about, discuss how that could be done, what really would it take? What would we have to imagine? Who should participate? How should people participate? And also, the question, what should be excluded when we come to these subjects? Is it something for civil society? Is it something political? Is that conceivable at all to think, to come up with a format for today in order to have a conference like that? What do you think?
I will say the movement, will have to have an objective, which is to dismantle capitalism and racism, and that will be already a very important step. Capitalism is waging war against people, against humanity. It's not just, what is coming with the climate catastrophe, which is already, a lot of people in the global south are already victims of that. So we see a destruction, but absolutely a systematic destruction of the condition, the basic condition of life for so many, a large part of humanity. Of course, there is a war, and so there is something about also the spectacle, the visual culture, because the visual culture of war is spontaneously understandable. You see what we see, for instance, right now, whether in Sudan or in Ukraine, we understand. But it's much more difficult to have a visual culture of the fact that, for instance, more people are dying of air pollution every year than of any other cause, even of war, right? And there is still, the access to water is more and more restricted. The fact that, for instance, after what is called natural catastrophe, and we know that the consequences are increased because of political choices, but also because of sexism and racism and patriarchy. So women find themselves, and even certainly in the war, without access to the elemental, sanitary pad, water to wash themselves and so on. And I'm thinking if we start from these things, what is, because I read that this is thought as trivial, it's by most organizations. If we were starting from the elemental, what this does, what kind of movement then will be? If we were starting from effectively what happened to girls and women and trans and LGBTQE in this situation, because then they will bear even more burden. So perhaps that will be already the base for thinking what kind of movement, starting from those who are fabricated as the most vulnerable.
And let me come to that right away, because you asked, is that even conceivable? I would say yes. And at the same time, of course, it's a huge challenge. What format could we come up with here? And of course, the expectation would have to be that the voices of those who are the most vulnerable, who are the most concerned, be heard. And you just spoke of 1915 and who got excluded at the time, and that's correct. It was mainly women from a certain social class and who had the means and possibility to travel at the time. And then in 1919, in the following Congress, for example, there were two important activists, Terrell and Acted. They were the two only women from Ghana who then were able to participate in 1919. And let me build this bridge, come back to the next point, because what they had demanded in the discussion was that this take place in Paris, and there was no other women that was allowed to participate. For example, they demanded a racial justice clause, and here they wanted that the subject of racism and colonization become an important political issue to be discussed, and here in Paris. And and Mary Church Terrell, they didn't have any chance here to actually also get this to be part of the discussion in the League. And what happened, for example, was that then other colonial powers came into play, and then a few decades ahead, when we're talking about the fact, that feminist peace, which wanted the end of war and conflict, that doesn't necessarily mean that this would mean security for everyone. And then here, one of the wars in Rwanda, and that was in 1990, here there was a very concrete, let me give you a concrete example. After the genocide in Rwanda, that was in the 90s, when the French soldiers then were deployed there in order to protect people in refugee camps, what happened was that in these refugee camps, many of the women were raped by the French soldiers, even under the eyes of higher military-ranking personnel and medical doctors. So that shows many things. It shows that the most vulnerable people in society aren't even safe if they are under supposed protection of peace powers. And it also shows that in this way of thinking in the International League of Nations, that here in the if you can't come up with this idea that when you create new institutions, that this factor should be a part of it, that this then leads a few years later to a situation where racial justice doesn't play any role at all, where it's difficult to protect the women. And that is just one of the examples of what is important to feminist foreign policy that could help to lead to such a transition and to reduce the potential of violence in society.
After your example, that anyway there is no freedom of circulation for a lot of people, so that would mean also what are, you know, the economy of this meeting, right? I mean, how do you facilitate for women? I mean, we know that most African people don't have a huge difficulty to get a visa to arrive in Europe, in Fortress Europe, right? So even that, you know, that has to be considered. All those things have to be considered, the way in which, and the lives that do not matter, right? Who are the good refugee? Who are the bad refugee? Who are, you know, and even feminism, what do we talk about? Because when a woman participated, you know, they joined army in a movement of national liberation, they say to, I mean, in Algeria or in Cameroon or in Vietnam or, you know, or other place, they say that they could not, you know, that peace, I mean, the question of non-violence was not, you know, relevant for them. So when we think also of that, we have to consider many levels of what is, you know, the constant exclusion and inclusion, and what, but the question of inclusion is also what are the issues that are considered, you know, to be included, not just the people. And also the incredible different approach also to feminism that, you know, that what is the feminist movement for peace and freedom? What is a peace that has to be, what is the content, and is also what is the content of freedom? But also what you say, I think very important is the notion of protection. You know, what is protection? Who is protected and by whom? Because the example you gave in Rwanda happened also in Haiti, for Asian women by the United Nations soldiers. They were raped by United Nations soldiers. And we have also to consider as feminists that, of course, women are raped in, you know, like mostly, but also young boys and young men. So the question of rape as a tool, I mean, as a weapon, systemic weapon, has to be, we have to think as feminists what is, you know, not just in exclusive gender way. Why is that? You know, what is it? All the report, or the CIA report, say that they systematically rape their prisoner in Iraq. And so this was for Iraq, so we don't know for the other place. So what is going on in this question of rape? How do we expand our feminist analysis of rape as a tool of armies and military in occupied territory or as they are doing war?
Ja. Und mir stellt sich da auch die daran anschließende Frage.
And here this leads on to the next question, you know, with this diversity of conflicts that we have seen in the world, that we are currently seeing in the world. There are many discussions in Germany, in Iran, in Ukraine, in Sudan. We just heard about the situation there. But beyond that, there's many more. So, you know, to have the expectation to talk about it, to discuss this, and ask the question, is it even possible, or would we really have to have more time in order to put them into a broader context for our discussion?
Well, perhaps you have to see what you can do where you are. I would say, for instance, if you are in Europe, we are in Europe, we have really to stop the weapon, you know, the arm industry. That's very, I mean, because, for instance, you hear European people in European Parliament, whatever, you know, saying, oh, the war in Yemen, right? But the war in Yemen is waged by Saudi Arabia. Where is Saudi Arabia getting its weapon from? You know, that in Germany, right, and France. So there is a way in which you can act to stop, you know, something, you know, like from going on, and then after it has to be from the people who are fighting that they will tell you what they need, and then you have to see how you can fulfill that demand. I mean, during different wars, for instance, what was the demand of those who were resisting, for instance, a war by fascists or by in Europe or by colonial power, was the demand for refuge and sanctuary and money and places to hide. places that they knew that if they knock on the door will open, no question asked, and they will have a hot shower and a bed to sleep. It's sometimes this is really what we can do. Yeah. So in Europe right now, there is, who is hunted today? Refugee and migrant. So how do we build, refuge and sanctuary for them, and especially effectively for, how do we protect them from the state? I mean, they are dying every day. Some are dying in the Mediterranean or in the Channel or even on the border of Europe. And, one of the moments for me, which was really a very important point, what happened at the Belarus-Poland borders 2 years ago, when there was like thousands and thousands of refugees in sub-zero temperature. And they were, the police from Poland or Belarus was with a water cannon, very cold, and they were rendering the forest. They didn't know. I mean, it was incredible. And this was, and the government from Poland used the term hybrid war. This is an hybrid war. And they were supported by the European community. So that was something that happening here, was not very far away. And the people from Poland who helped the refugee, who wanted to help, were criminalized. So the criminalization of solidarity is part also of the struggle we can have here, because we are in Europe, so as we are in Europe. But the criminalization of solidarity is very important because people are sued just to open their door to migrants. You had the case in France of a man who took a woman who was pregnant in the snow, in the snowstorm, to take her to the hospital, and the gendarme arrived and arrested him as a smuggler. So this, solidarity is really criminalized. So what's happening also with the state? What is the state doing, and authoritarian state, and if not, practically neo-fascist like in Italy, or,
Ja, und es fängt da an, wo ihr seid. Das ist sehr stark. Ja.
So yeah, this is very powerful.
Zu deiner Frage, also ich glaube, es muss beides eben gleichzeitig geschehen. Ne?
And I think we have to do both at the same time.
Zwischen 2010 und 2020,
between 2010 and 2020, the number of international conflicts has doubled from about 30 to 60. Same with the people who had to flee, from 40 to 80 million. And since 2020, the figure has risen considerably, even from that. So all these conflicts that are happening need to be analyzed and looked at individually. You can't just have one set of guidelines of a feminist foreign policy in a one-size-fits-all approach. At the same time, we can look at the larger dynamics and try to understand the general underlying dynamics. When the Russian war against Ukraine started, we had two big factors, the extractive industries and the weapons industry. In a time where we have so much murder, rape, destruction, we need to consider the fact that there are profiteers. This is not just disgusting, this is a fact that we need to do something about. And it makes me so angry, this line of argumentation. So Germany introduces a feminist foreign policy. There's a lot of talk, there are talk shows and discussions, and people say the same thing times and again. Well, we can't afford this. We have wars on our hands. We don't have time to implement this. We do this when we have time for it. And, well, the fact that the world is in this situation and has been in this situation for decades, centuries, millennia, is because we have this patriarchal society that does not punish male violence, that does not limit male violence. And we need to say quite clearly that we need radically feminist solutions. We need to shift powers. And now if people talk about militarization being the only solution, it makes me angry. Because, of course, it is correct that in a context where we have allowed violence to erupt, of course, we need to protect and support the people who are being attacked and who need to defend themselves, including with weapons. This is a feminist understanding. This is a deeply feminist concern, protecting people who are threatened by violence and who are subjected to violence. But we also need solutions that help us avoid a situation that we have nuclear armament, that people have nuclear weapons with which they can cause tremendous destructions. So we need to mainstream these positions and these ideas. And if it's being said we don't have time for this, this is cynical, as are many of the arguments that are being used against feminist foreign policy. I read interesting things being said about me. I am a radically dangerous person, apparently, if I ask for feminist strategies. This reminds me a bit of a quote that I once read of a colleague, Ray Asherson, a very important expert on international disarmament and nuclear disarmament, who said,
und damit diese für mich verkehrte Argumentation
on this topic, exposing this line of argument. She said, I give you zero budget and 30 seconds to solve all your problems that patriarchy has ever created. And if you don't succeed, your feminism failed, basically. So we've had 4,000 years of patriarchy, a lot of violence, a lot of destructions. Now there's a new idea which has existed for a very short time. Maybe about 100 years of feminist foreign and security policy ideas. And of course, we haven't managed to completely dismantle the militarization of society. And we have to clearly look or closely look at how this discussion is being waged against us.
I have a little problem with feminist foreign policy, if I may say. Because foreign policy is a state. And I am for solidarity, internationalism, transnational feminism. Because, for instance, if France claims that it has a feminist foreign policy, which is just blah, 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 but also it's in fact, targeting different forces. It's imposing Western feminism a view, and we should not forget that it was also Madame Bush Jr. when the US launched the war in Afghanistan, say that it was mostly to go to save Afghan women who were oppressed. So we have to be careful about, I know that this is not what you were saying, but for me, there is no feminist foreign policy, because foreign policy is a term that belongs to the state and belongs to the diplomatic world full of men, and we are not, nobody is part of that, so nobody, perhaps some humanitarian organization. For me, what will be effectively a feminist transnational movement for peace today in the 21st century, but outside of the state. I don't see how the state can have a feminist foreign policy. The state is in the service of capitalism, the state is in the service of the arms industry and different industry, and has also, will also bargain something in the diplomatic relation. The case of Rwanda was given, and it was like so many European powers had a part in the genocide, so many powers. None of them went to trial, none. It was just effectively some people, some men from Rwanda, but none of the, responsible. I mean, Bush has never been at the International Tribunal for Crime, although, I give his name. I mean, there are so many anyway that it will be, there will be a crowd. But, I mean, this also, the way we have to think, what has been the institution put, following we have to punish people responsible for war and crime. What we have seen, okay, we saw some people from ex-Yugoslavia, but otherwise you see African, you know, or you see, you know, like something raises really question. What is, to go to your question, you know, like, what is in which way peace is being conceived and imposed by greater power on smaller state, on powerless state, I mean, less powerful state, and it's not a peace. It's not peace, and it's certainly not feminism. I mean, Africa is the African continent, the wide African continent, where there is so much, how can I say, feminist goodwill falling onto this continent that, you know, it will be better that, you know, they leave it alone.
Yeah, please do. So, yeah, can I? I love that you just said that, and about. So actually, in my book, I'm writing about why the nation state actually doesn't go together with feminism and feminist foreign policy. What you just said, and that was the very reason. Those couple of pages why. Ach so, ja. Also, Entschuldigung. Warum in einem Artikel kürzlich mir Staatsfeindlichkeit
So this is the reason, actually, why they said in this article that I am anti-state. And it's quite correct what you say. We have to understand the analysis. How did the nation-state emerge? It was an expansive idea, you know, to keep the others out. Imperialism, colonialism, all of this is part of it, and it's important to say this and keep it in mind. I don't know, perhaps, I don't know if you will agree with me, but perhaps this is the beauty of different roles that we may have, or different positions. My organization, we try to convince governments to change their foreign policy. So we have debates, and of course we have to understand how do states and governments work, and what is our room for maneuver. At the same time, a lot of people say this concept doesn't make any sense, because if it's from the state, it's not feminist. So it's important that other voices keep pointing this out, basically keep us on our toes, so that we can transform societies together towards something that is no longer exclusionary, and that doesn't let people drown in the Mediterranean, for example. I don't know if that makes sense to you.
No, it does, and I think you're right, but I do think that, of course, there are people who have to lobby with government, and there are others who have to prepare for the underground. There's, you know, it's really opening refuge, opening, you know, like really, I mean, right now, for me, I think Europe is very scary. What's happening in Europe? It's scary. And of course there is a war, and it attracts, I mean, and it's important, of course, that this war stop, that Russian invasion stop, and that war. But the way in which it absorbs, you know, all this, and in the meantime, so many measures and laws are taken in the name of that, you know, and that will go against the interests of the, you know, of the poor, the workers, the trans, the woman, and the refugee, the migrant. As you were saying, there is no money for hospital and school, but there is money for that. And also, and we do know also that you know, a lot of corporations are already offering their service to Ukraine when Ukraine will be at peace again. And so, you know, the way in which, in fact, already, you know, the vulture are already there. So we have to fight not only for the end of war, but also for the post-moment that will arrive, because this is when, you know, suddenly, oh, we have to rebuild Ukraine and so on. But who is rebuilding? Who are you? Did you ask people how it's going to be rebuilt? We know that a lot of countries which were rebuilt after wars were, in fact, to impose a certain, also a certain form, economy, policies, and so on. So, I think there is a feminism of the state. It's state feminism, and it's very strong. I mean, we have a president in France, and it's really, there is something that is state feminism, in fact. It does. We should not say it's not feminism, it's state feminism. Mm-hmm. Because if we don't understand how it works. We don't understand how women's rights have been weaponized by some state, to exert some policies that are, in fact, from my view, against women's rights. So yeah, there was a weaponization for, right, I mean, 15 years ago, you did not hear, so much about women's rights everywhere. I mean, it was brought by the UN decade, but very strongly by the 2000. Every state now, every international foundation is for women's rights. Everyone is for equality. So you start to wonder, since you see that there is more and more inequality and injustices, you say, so for me it's not like so much like they are lying or, that, no, this is their understanding of equality.
Und dann gleichzeitig, was du gerade gesagt hast, dass wir die Zahlen zeigen, dass obwohl in den letzten Jahren die Gelder international
over the past years,
stetig angestiegen sind,
funds have constantly increased for military purposes, and very low percentage rate, like 1 to 2%, go to grassroots organizations, of what is given to social for social reasons. So not necessarily to those who have the greatest effects. And speaking of pinkwashing, you just mentioned France and feminist foreign policy. I think since 2019, France is officially pursuing a feminist foreign policy, and certainly we can congratulate them that here funds have been shifted and more funds are being expended that somehow include also women's rights. But what is not being addressed, and what in your analysis is quite correct, is that France is one of the states that signed the Non-Proliferation Treaty on nuclear weapons, is one of the nuclear powers, and there can hardly be that can hardly be credible. The biggest patriarchal tool of destruction is nuclear power that's ever been, invented. So here, with this enunciation of this feminist foreign policy, unfortunately, it can hardly be expected that everything is going to be transformed from one day to the next. But recently, I was in touch with the French Ministry of Foreign Affairs. We had an online session, and I was told by the representative that the civil society, and feminist society, allegedly in France, wouldn't even be interested that feminist foreign policy should be, go in direction of demilitarization, and and that can't be. And you cannot just, take a few things out that you like in this box of feminism, because the core is to have non-violent structures worldwide, and that's something that you cannot do if not demilitarization is your goal number one.
Just one thing. Effectively, you were talking about nuclear weapon and nuclear industry, and when we were saying what can we do, for me, for instance, it's to say that France has nuclear power and nuclear because it extracts uranium in Niger and then export the war, externalize the violence, so that constant externalization of violence, and that after we have a discussion about nuclear weapon or nuclear power in France, and where do we going to bury, the West. But in the meantime, this is made possible because violence and war has been externalized. in Nigeria. So we have also, when we talk about war, how violence is also externalized, and so that there is a apparent peace here, you know. So there is peace here because there is war which is being waged everywhere for the extraction of resources that bring the peace in Europe.
Ja, danke. Und damit würden wir nämlich auch gerne noch an das Publikum
now,
auch die
we would
Möglichkeit
also like to open the floor to the audience to ask questions to our experts. And if you're interested, please just raise your hand. And if we don't have any reactions right away, you can think about it. And I also would have a few more questions. Oh, right here. We have a question right here. A microphone is coming up in order to make sure everybody can hear you. Just wait a second.
Can I ask it in English? Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay. I wanted to ask a question. Maybe it's going in a slightly different direction, but this is an assembly, what we're doing today, or why we're here. And I wanted to ask you what you think the potential of assembly is in a feminist movement today, and also if you think we assembled here. Yeah, that's my question.
Wer möchte antworten gerne?
Who would like to answer?
It's a decision that has to be taken collectively. We are here, effectively, we can decide to transform this assembly into, okay, are we ready, all those who are here, I don't know, to define, like in 1915, what will be our point, what will be, you know, the manifesto, what will be the objective. Any moment that we are a collective, I mean, we are different people together and we are not coming from the same places. I'm not talking about country, but also talking about class and race and genders and interests. Yes, there is a possibility because it brings effectively a multiplicity of not, I will say, voice only, but even the way we look at things or the way we think they can be resolved. And so this different experience can you know, someone will say, but this will not work, or this would, you know, this is perhaps just for Europe or whatever. But yeah, of course.
Ja. Gibt es weitere Fragen im Publikum?
Do we have further questions from the audience?
Erstmal nicht.
For the time
Doch,
being,
da
doesn't
gibt's
seem to be the case.
vorne noch
Yes,
eine
there is
Person.
one up here.
My question is, this assembly, I think tonight was more about analysis, about to find what is now the state, and also to make it visible, what the possibility more visible, and I think all the time, what can I do and what can we do? So it's the same direction, maybe this cooperative thing you said, the solidarity. Maybe this is possible, very important. But how can we do that? To be longer here this evening, begin. My question is, what can we do concretely? I think you work on this thing every day, and the details you can't tell us all. But what can I do? What can we do? You don't have the answer really, but maybe you have some thoughts about that.
You want to answer?
Yeah, I can try. Verstehen Sie auch Deutsch? Okay, gut.
Do you speak German?
Ich glaube, etwas, was wir alle tun können.
One thing that we all can do is, well, 2 weeks ago, I wrote a text about male violence against women because there was the statistics that was published from the police. And for people who are active, you know, feministically, they are not surprised to hear that sexual violence, well, almost all the perpetrators are male in our society. So that really is the basis of violence and conflict and war in this world. This male aggression, violence that is then reflected in global crises and wars. So those are acts of violence that you can see in this police statistics. Now, when I wrote this text, you know, already there was talk about the next wave of violence, and I believe what's the most important thing that we can do is try to look at the status quo of male violence against women and try to break through it, no longer accept it.
Ganz genau richtig. Genau.
Exactly right, but unfortunately we couldn't hear that. So
genau, das ist das Problem,
it's people who are non-binary, who are genderqueer. Well, we don't even have data concerning these people.
Und das ist nicht mal festgehalten in polizeilichen
Kriminalstatistiken. That's not even reflected in the police statistics. They're not even counting that.
Und es gibt auch, es gibt nämlich ganz spannende Forschung.
And there are really interesting research projects that show you know, the level of equality that you have in a society, and here the most significant factor is this particular basis for the question whether wars or conflicts will lead to a war. So this basis that we all know about should no longer be accepted. In Germany, for example, there's no coordination body that would cover the subject of violence against women, femicides, for example. So the Istanbul Convention has not yet been transposed in Europe. Many want to even leave it. So this really is the most important core problem that we should look at.
Okay, what can we do more quickly? Well, for me, for instance, as an activist, I mean, there are. I'm not saying them in rank of importance. First, I have to understand what, you know, what are the problems? If I were in Munich, what are the most pressing things in Munich in terms of violence? You know? And so how do I organize against that? In my neighborhood, you know, are there violence against trans, against migrants, against refugees, against, you know, veiled women? And so, you know, what do I do? You know, and you know, that's already. And then I will say, for me, I need to educate myself constantly. Absolutely, education. I need absolutely to educate myself. For that, I need also to be constantly curious, that not accepting things as they are. You know, this is the world as it is. No. I mean, nothing is natural in this world, you know, like this is, you know, social forces that build the way we are, that room, you know. So how do I understand how that was made and how it can be made differently, you know. Absolutely refusing, this is the way things goes. No, that's not true. Denaturalizing constantly and explaining. I mean, a lot of things we have to do is to explain why effectively things are not right, and how also injustice are not like that because people are lazy or people are whatever or not working. And really, this is, I mean, education is extremely important because we live in a world where school, university, media, cinema, TV tell us constantly occupy our mind with lie. And school teachers, I don't know in Germany, but elsewhere, school teachers to stay silent for hours and sit like that for, I don't know, from when you are 4 years old to whenever, I don't remember, and teach you not to ask questions. teach you not to ask questions. And so you have to find again that curiosity of the child. We say, why is that like that? Why is it like that? Why is it like that? And then after a while, say, stop asking questions. It's boring. You have to ask again question. You have to refuse the fact that this is really, one of the things is very important because in fact, what is the power is extremely afraid when we unmask their lie. They're really afraid of that. They're afraid of ideas. They have no imagination. The only imagination they have is like how to discipline and punish. And they will find, their imagination, technological solution for problem, right? Green capitalism where the world is falling apart, right? So we have to also work our imagination, because ideas are very important to help us, to say, okay, this is what we want, For me, it was work a lot on the question of slavery. It lasted 4 centuries, right? 4 centuries. There was not a day. There was not an insurrection here, a revolt over there, people refusing. Because the idea of freedom was constantly very strong. It was one day we will be free, and we will be ready for that freedom. And that mobilized, and really, people were thinking about it. Nothing stopped it, and a lot of people died along the way. But the idea. So why do we want to fight for today? What are we ready to fight for? And then that idea, we find ways to get there. And these ways are absolutely multiple. But the point is effectively to resist the lie, to resist the naturalization of things, and effectively, and to construct solidarity. And it's not easy. Activism is not easy. It's long. It's difficult. You go through defeat and setback, but that's the way struggle is. If you, as Stuart Hall was saying, you have to fight without guarantee. If you start to fight and say, okay, I want to be victorious tomorrow, then stay somewhere, I don't know, do something else, Because effectively it's long. I don't like to be personal because it's not very important, but I have lived through defeat and setback, a lot of them, and real one. When you lose everything, you lose what you fought for, and in one day it's taken from you and it's destroyed. So and then the following day you start again.
Mir war vor allem auch wichtig, das jetzt zu hören, weil wir haben analysiert, wir weinen, wir müssen jeden Tag wütend sein, aber wo geht die
There is no more.
Das wollte ich.
Übersetzung?
There is no microphone, unfortunately.
Okay. Sorry.
She just said it was very important for her to do that. Es gibt
but I understand, but it's also a state of mind. It's not just it's not. As you want to find.
Kristina Lunz, du musst los an der Stelle, genau, weil du noch einen Flieger erwischt.
Unfortunately, Kristina Lunz has to leave because she has a plane to catch.
Wir haben noch 14 Minuten.
We have another 14 minutes to discuss.
Genau.
Soll ich das hier dann machen?
Genau, wir haben noch 14 Minuten mit
So we have another 14 minutes with Françoise, and we also have 3 requests for the floor.
Ja, genau, vielleicht hören wir alle, machen uns Notizen und gucken, ob wir die gesammelt beantworten können.
We will just collect questions and then perhaps take some notes and then see if we can answer all the questions together. Yes, actually, I wanted to come in to what Françoise just said and explained. I believe that every person can use their own sphere of influence, their own spaces, in order to transform power relationships. And everybody can find these spaces for themselves. I think this is so great about activism. Activism can also be art, it can be theater, it can be research. It can be literature. It can be a lot of things. And I also want to draw attention to the fact that often emancipatory discourses are appropriated by the power. And we always need to be critical of this. If something is mainstreamed, if something is appropriated by the mainstream, if feminism becomes mainstream, what does this mean for feminist criticism?
Unter anderem vom Kapitalismus, sich dieser Diskurse anzunehmen.
So what if capitalism appropriates such hitherto emancipatory concepts? We saw this, feminist foreign policy, feminist activism. Pinkwashing is a big issue.
Genau, jetzt heutzutage die feministischen Außenpolitik.
Or feminist foreign policy. Which is why we at WILPF always point out that a feminist civil society and solidarity in a feminist civil society is important. This is part of our policy. And it has to be part of the state's policy too, to want this civil society, because we need money in order to create spaces, in order to have our discussions, in order to do research, and so on. And now I'm trying to find a point. But anyway, keep working on it together, remaining curious, asking questions. What does it mean if discourses change? The next speaker, I'd like to tie in with this. I am a local politician here in Munich, and I ask myself these questions every day. And I think I can't do foreign policy every day, but everything hangs together. Everything is foreign policy as well. Also the debate on whether the Kammerspiele do good work or bad work, which is a debate we're currently having in Munich. Who is listening? For whom is this done? And how does feminist foreign policy come into this? And what about climate activists? How do we handle climate activism? And in my everyday work and despair, I have no other option than to say I live a radical solidarity with all those who are less privileged than I am. I am a feminist in the city council. I am a queer politician. I am in favor of self-determination for trans people, because this is such a group that is so much less privileged than I am. And no matter if I can understand what this is about, if I can emotionally relate to their struggle, if I feel their struggle, it doesn't matter. I identify as a white, cis, female person. I am so much more privileged than trans persons that my solution for myself is I am their ally. I am at their side. I am at the side of those who fight for their rights to live in dignity, to live without being injured, and I stand up for them, or stand with them, in front of them if need be. I say something. I speak up. And if I'm the only one in my group, when such debates are being had, I have to do this, I believe. Even though it sometimes feels weird, because I feel, am I allowed to speak for this group? Because this is a marginalized group that should speak for itself. But of course, my speaking up is only an interim solution, my solidarity, opening my mouth and saying, stop, this is not okay. Now, unfortunately, there are limits, but this is what I try to do in my everyday life. Yes. Thank you. And then now there was a third request for the floor.
I would like to refer to the former statement and ask what can radical solidarity look like, and is it speaking for people or with people? That's one question. Mm-hmm. Then does solidarity need a certain self-reflection? I would call myself an activist for decolonizing issues and so on. But the question is, in how far do each of us contribute to a power structure? In what way? And how can contribution look like? I'm referring to history. Women dominating other women has been part of the emancipation process. So if we look at colonial history, if we look at the slavery system, it was women oppressing other women. So in what way is self-reflection part of the process to solidarize with each other?
Okay, thank you. Okay, ein Bogen von Thematiken.
Right, a lot of different topics. Françoise, what do you think?
Well, one thing about capitalism and appropriation. Capitalism is a very mobile, very moving force, and it's a necessity to transform everything into commodity and to colonize. Colonization is at the heart of capitalism, and need to expand. You need to find new bodies, new mind, new things, new territory to colonize. And so effectively, I mean, all this, especially even faster now than it used to be, really much faster. You know, they grab things very quickly and to dilute it and to pacify it. So, I mean, the response to that, I mean, there is no way you're going to stop, you know, a corporation to transform some, you know, radical feminist or revolutionary feminism into something that appears on a T-shirt, you know. When I wrote Decolonial Feminism, I say, oh my God, you know, in a month, I may see a T-shirt, I am a decolonial feminist, you know, made by women in Bangladesh and sold on the platform that you know. And what would I do? You know, I'm not doing it. So the point is like to give constant content to what you are fighting for. It's because there is a moment in the content, it cannot follow you. You know, it's when you attack the class interest, when you attack that, they're not going to follow you, right? They will even. So there is a way of. The point is like to remain faithful to that, to the dismantle of racial capitalism. I was thinking, otherwise I was thinking also about what happened recently, you know, in different countries where you had a revolution. I mean, I was thinking about Algeria, Tunisia, Egypt, Lebanon, and now in Iran. And why, for instance, Algeria, Tunisia, Egypt, and Lebanon fail? Fail for now, or did not fail. And I do think because, I mean, there are effectively internal questions, internal forces, but there is also absolutely a will by the West that this revolution do not succeed. It speaks, you know, but they don't, because they are afraid of a real revolution that will effectively challenge their economic interests and military interests in a place. If in Algeria, Algeria, the problem was it was not enough feminist as a movement. It refused Algerian feminist contribution. So it also weakened the movement because of that. But otherwise, there is a certain, we have to understand that there is a certain interest of Europe or, you know, the West, that this revolution do not succeed. And in Iran, there is a, you know, there is perhaps also a will, because if a feminist socialist revolution succeeds in Iran, the whole region is transformed. The whole region transformed. Yes. Absolutely, you know, Israel, Jordan, the Gulf state, and this, you know, they prefer to remain like that, you know, like even fighting against each other, making war, but because this is the greatest threat, you know, is really the greatest threat that a feminist socialist revolution win. To the question for people or with the people, I mean, when there is a narrative about women's rights and how it came in Europe, and in the West, and it culminates with the right to vote. That's the narrative, you know, the dominant narrative. I always remind that there was a right that white women had since the 15th century was to own human being and to be at the head of plantation. It was not a right given from their gender, because they did not have the right to go to the university or to do other things, but they had the right because of their the color of their skin, because of whiteness. So we have also to review, I mean, to revive this history of rights when we bring that in, you know. There were women at the head of plantation, and we do know through the studies of when slavery was abolished in England, but also in France, as you know, slave owners were compensated for the loss of their property. And you see in the UK, because in France, of course, we are still waiting for such a study, we see that some women were owning slaves in a plantation that they didn't know where it was. It was, you know, like investing, like today you will go to your bank and your banker will say, oh, invest in that, you know. And so they receive financial compensation for one or two human being that they, you know, that they own somewhere in Barbados or somewhere. So the capital, it was capital for this woman. Some white women got wealthy because human beings were capital under slavery. And they understood it because in the US, for instance, white women who were given slaves, for instance, by their father, right, as inheritance, when they understood very well that it was capital. So when they were marrying, they absolutely require that there would be a contract in which it would be stated that this human being belonged to them, because they understood it was capital, and that they did not want to give it, you know, to common property with the husband. So we have to be careful. We have to be careful not to think effectively that women were passive or, you know, not understanding the economic of slavery. They understood it very well, and they understood also post-slavery colonization. So the question of for people and with the people, for me, it has to be with the people. As I say, you know, solidarity is also what do you want us to do, you know? And also, this is what we can do when we understand our situation. I mean, if you are in Italy or in Spain, you understand perhaps where you have to throw, you know, the sand to stop the machine, because you know that. But the people fighting somewhere and ask you, this is what we want you to do, then you do. You don't decide. So but this, again, can take many, many forms. Can be, you know, the publication of text, the translation. The question of translation is extremely important. The diffusion of that, or effectively raising money. You know, I mean, there are many examples through history, you know, of a woman fighting in different places in the world and saying, okay, we want this or we want that. And it's, of course, if they are a refugee or, you know, people in exile, to facilitate their integration. Because this is not, because sometimes, you know, Europe say, oh, we are happy, we brought them. And then they don't have money, they don't have jobs. They don't have, you know, facility to be there, you know, like to live in Germany or France or elsewhere or in Holland, whatever. So we have to be careful that from the beginning to the end, all things, you know, are really looked through. And also, and all the thread are you know, interested. And also we have to fight against the racist distinction, against what are the good struggle, what are the bad struggle, who are the good people to support, who are the people who should not support. And that's also a question of solidarity should answer to not to be very strongly situated. You know, and for me is the people who ask me to support them, are they anti-racist? Are they anti-capitalist? Are they anti-imperialist? Which then they are anti-patriarchy? Then yes. But if they, you know, if these people, otherwise I'm not just supporting people just because, you know, you have to support people. They are, but it's right now, there are so many things to think through, and it go back to your question. It's sometimes difficult. You feel that, assaulted from everywhere, like, oh my God, like in this and this and that. Where should I, put my energy? Where should I focus my, where should I invest my struggle, right? My energy. And this is a decision also which can be individual, but I don't think that you ever fight alone. That's not possible. You have to fight. I mean, you have to find a collective. So a struggle for me is collective. It's always collective.
Thank you was alles abgedeckt
for
hat
this
Denkanstößen, die noch kamen.
Very good food for thought that you're giving us. I would have one last question that is actually hard to do justice to, just considering time is pressing. Revolutionary peace. Well, as you said, we are not seeing peace. It's really just a ceasefire, right? But revolutionary peace, what could the vision of that be? How could that look like?
What, I have 1 minute, 1 minute
now. In 1 minute!
Okay. Yeah, this is when effectively I was starting to think through the state of permanent war and that peace is ceasefire rather than peace. And because also peace is not, for me, war is not just the bomb and the tank, but the war which is waged every day against people. People, like, as you know, I work a lot with, perhaps you don't, but cleaning women, and how their body are exhausted, they are sick, so how extraction is not just extraction of resources and material, is extraction also of the life force of so many racialized body. So I started to think about, that effectively there is no peace. And so it's armed peace, to borrow from Rosa Luxemburg. And I say, okay, there is peace, which is a revolutionary peace. And revolutionary peace is something that it was, I think, the Black Panther at one point used also this expression. For me, it's effectively the peace that will end the war and not be ceasefire. This is what we have to fight for, and which means effectively dismantling the structure of domination. So I cannot tell you how it will look like, but although, as I was saying, I think that the work of imagination is extremely important today. It's extremely important today, because we have, it's suffocating the way the space and the mind are occupied by what, because they have so many tools, like there was so many capacity, possibility, and not all of them are stupid. I mean, a lot of them are very good and fabricate consent to inequality and war. So how I attack the fabrication of consent, how that makes things natural or well, what else, or you are naive, or you're stupid, this is, for whatever. And how we take that. And one of the things one of the method, it's the method of speculative fiction. You start from fact. So it's not just we go to Mars and, all this dream of 14-year-old men who are nonetheless 35 and billionaire. No, it's really, you start from fact. Yeah, the fact of today, the current fact. And then you project yourself 15 years later. And things have, but you project yourself as you have changed things, but nonetheless this fact remains. You see what I mean? So you don't erase. So I work on something like that about, for me, about lungs, because the question of breathing, which is so important today, because as I say, there are so many people who are, it's an unbreathable world in which we live, So it was to imagine, something I wrote, it like we will be in 2072, I think. And so I was looking back, and there was like a movement which was called Breathe to Resist. And it was led by women. And they had built an underground route to help people to recover the lungs, because because the rich, I mean, okay, I will stop, but it's a story. But the point was like, how from a fact, we resist and imagine things that will help us to fight against. You see what I mean? So, and for me, the work of imagination is very, very important today, because I see how our imagination is quite often restricted, and that we, just an example, for instance, because I work on the decolonization of museums, and for a lot of people, it's, just adding things on the wall. Okay, only men, okay, we're going to put 50% women. And then among the men and the women, we will be careful that we have things from, every part of the world. And I say, but who is cleaning the place? Who is cleaning the place? Who is guarding the place? What is the structure? It's a social entity, and I have to look at everything. So that's the work of imagination. I have to look at everything. So what kind of institution I will build that will not rest on inequality, racism, sexism, and different hierarchy. So for instance, for the museum, for me, it's like, what is the training they have? What kind of education the art historian will have before? Because if it's the same, I mean, I can change, everything about the museum, but if the art historian has the same training, not going to change much, right? And then we have to work collectively. As again, for me, when I enter in a museum, I ask, who is cleaning the museum? This invisible work done by women mostly, and then I can enter the museum and blah, blah, blah about, aesthetics and everything, because the place has been cleaned by a woman who is certainly underpaid, totally invisibilized. So this is, when I say imagination, it's not to, it's then the institution we will want, the feminist anti-racist decolonial institution will say, we will need to clean the place, right? But how will we clean so that is not, subcontracted and will rest on the body of racialized women that will be exhausted and pressing. So that's part of the thinking. This is what I mean. So everything that we look at, we can work from there. We can review. We should not accept the world as it is. The institutions are there, okay? And they have been there for centuries. They have imposed racist, sexist institution. What we should do to transform, to have, not to accept any of the way in which they were built. But at the same time, we need an institution. So that revolutionary peace is not just, the end of the bomb and the tank. It's effectively thinking the world we want to build with the kind of institution we want to build and the kind of cities we want to build. And of course, it's not going to happen right away, but it will be very important to think about it because it will help us to transform as well.
Vielen Dank. Das waren ganz wunderbare abschließende Worte für diesen Panel heute. Ich glaube, das Publikum hätte noch viele Fragen gehabt, ich hätte noch viele Fragen gehabt und wir könnten lange weitermachen. Aber das war heute erstmal dieses Panel und ich bedanke mich ganz herzlich nochmal bei Kristina Lunz, die schon weg ist, bei Françoise Vergès und auch bei allen Anwesenden und bei allen Organisierenden. Und damit schließen wir erstmal für heute und um 21 Uhr gibt es ja dann noch die Performance.